A farmer threw a puppy onto the road. What the bikers did shocked everyone. What makes a person cross the line where kindness becomes an unaffordable luxury? Perhaps the answer lies in the scorching haze shimmering over the old asphalt road, where time seems to have frozen along with the thick smell of wormwood and melting tar. The road led from the regional center to the town of Verkhney Yar, where life flowed slowly, like resin down a pine trunk. It was on this road, at the height of the July heat, that 4 heavy motorcycles broke the sleepy silence. They weren't racing, but riding in a steady column, the roar of their engines sounding like the low growl of a large, confident beast. In front was Andrei Gray Volkov, leader of the Steel Brothers Club. His gray temples contrasted sharply with his black leather vest. Behind him, slightly to the right, rode Tatiana Tornado Gromova, the only woman in their pack. Her long braids stuck out from under her bandana like the tail of a bird of prey. Bringing up the rear were veterinarian Mikhail Dok and the youngest and most daring of them all, Sergei, nicknamed Gloomy. Their appearance elicited the usual mixture of curiosity and apprehension from the few drivers they encountered. But the bikers paid no attention. They were simply returning home. Suddenly, the idyll was broken by the sharp screech of brakes. Ahead, about 100 meters away, an old rust-eaten pickup truck stopped abruptly at the side of the road. An elderly man in a greasy cap fell out of the cab, groaning. Andrei Volkov instinctively slowed down, raising his hand to warn the others. There was something wrong with the old man's movements, something fussy. The man, whose name was Ivan Petrovich Sidorchuk, walked around the car and jerked back the tarpaulin covering the bed. He pulled out a regular potato sack that was strangely moving and shaking. Without looking back, the farmer walked over to the tall grass by the road and, swinging his arms, emptied the contents of the sack into a deep ditch. There was a short, plaintive squeal, which was immediately drowned out by the rustling of weeds. Ivan Petrovich threw the empty bag back into the truck bed, slammed the tailgate shut, and climbed into the cab without looking back. The pickup truck sneezed out a cloud of gray smoke and took off, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and a heavy, ringing silence. Gloomy was the first to come to his senses. His face was contorted with rage. He twisted the throttle sharply, and his motorcycle roared, ready to take off in pursuit. "Stop!" Gray's voice was soft, but so authoritative that Sergei froze, clutching the handlebars with white fingers. "He's getting away, Commander," growled Hamuri, without turning around. "There's someone alive in the ditch," replied Sadoy calmly, pointing his chin toward the side of the road. "That's more important right now. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. Tanya had already jumped off the motorcycle without even turning off the engine. She rushed to the ditch, overgrown with nettles and burdocks, ignoring the stinging leaves. Doc followed her. He grimly lowered the footrest with a bang, tore the helmet off his head, and threw it on the seat. The gray-haired man watched silently, his face impenetrable as stone. A quiet, frightened whimper came from the depths of the ditch. "Careful, the nettles are waist-high," Doc warned, pushing aside the thick stems. Tanya didn't listen and climbed down. She saw it. A small, dirty ball of fur was trying to stand on its trembling legs, but one of them was twisted unnaturally. The puppy hid under a burdock and looked at the approaching girl with huge, terrified eyes. He was shaking so hard that he seemed about to fall apart. "Quiet, little one, quiet. I won't hurt you," Tanya whispered, slowly reaching out her hand. She wasn't wearing gloves, and her fingers, accustomed to metal and oil, were surprisingly gentle. The puppy instinctively flinched, but then, as if sensing something, froze. Tanya carefully picked him up. He was almost weightless. Dirty, smelling of dust and fear, he buried his nose in her leather jacket and fell silent, only occasionally shuddering. When Tanya straightened up, holding the puppy in her arms, the bikers saw not a menacing tornado, but simply a woman with a defenseless creature at her breast. Hermione turned away, spitting angrily into the dust. Doc immediately began to examine the puppy. "Dehydration, that's for sure," he said quietly, professionally feeling the puppy. "Looks like bruises, and there's something wrong with the hind leg. It seems to be dislocated. We need to get to a clinic, and fast. He needs an X-ray and an IV." Gray-haired man came closer. He looked at the trembling bundle in Tatiana's arms, and something like long-standing pain flashed in his eyes. "We're going to the city," he decided. "Tanya, he'll go with you. Wrap him in your jacket so he doesn't get cold." He turned to Kamur, who was still seething with rage. "Did you get the number?" asked Gray. Sergei nodded. "Good," said Gray. "The puppy first. We'll deal with the rest later." He put on his helmet, and his face became impenetrable again. The convoy started moving, but now its rhythm was different. Faster, more purposeful. 3 motorcycles raced ahead, while the 4th, with Tanya on it, followed a little slower. She held the warm body close to her, feeling its small, frightened heart beating beneath the skin. She did not yet know that this day would change not only the puppy's life, but their own as well. The arrival of 4 motorcycles in the quiet courtyard of a veterinary clinic on the outskirts of Verkhney Yar had the effect of a bomb going off. Everyone in the queue, consisting of an old woman with a cat in a basket and a young couple with a poodle, turned around. The roar of engines, the gleam of chrome, black leather, and stern faces. It all looked foreign and threatening here. When the bikers dismounted, the old woman clutched her basket fearfully. The clinic doors opened, and Tanya, carefully holding the puppy wrapped in her jacket, went inside. The others followed her, and the cramped reception room seemed to shrink in size. The young nurse behind the counter flinched and looked fearfully at the new arrivals. "We need a doctor, urgently." Tanya's voice was sharp, but there was a note of alarm in it. "Appointments only," the girl began, but then Doc stepped forward. He took off his dark glasses, and his expression immediately changed. He was no longer a biker, he was a professional. "Marina, hello. It's me, Zakharov," he said calmly. "We have an emergency. A puppy, hit by a car presumably, dislocated hind limb, dehydration, shock." Nurse Marina blinked in surprise when she recognized the stern, bearded man as her colleague who sometimes worked shifts here. "Mikhail Igorovich? I didn't recognize you." "Come in, of course," she said, bustling about. The general stupor gave way to surprised whispers. An old woman with a cat even stood up to get a better look. The grim-faced man stood by the wall, his arms crossed over his chest, glaring at everyone present as if challenging them. The gray-haired man silently surveyed the room, his calmness having a soothing effect on everyone. Tanya went into the examination room. She carefully placed the puppy on a metal table. Under the bright light of the lamp, he looked even more pitiful. His fur was matted and stained with dirt and blood, and his ribs were sticking out. When the jacket was removed, he shivered again from the cold and fear. Doc and the local veterinarian, an elderly man named Peter Semenovich, began their examination. "You're a fighter, kid," Peter Semenovich muttered, carefully feeling the paw. The puppy whimpered softly. Come on, Rocky, hang in there, said Hamori unexpectedly, stepping toward the table. Tanya looked at him in surprise. Rocky? She asked. Yeah, like the boxer. Life beat him up too, but he got back up, muttered Sergei, without looking up. That's how the puppy got his name. While the doctors were treating Rocky, they set his dislocation, put him on a drip, and treated his abrasions. The rest waited in the hallway. The tension gradually subsided. They were no longer treated as intruders. The same old woman, emboldened, approached Gray. Did you find him, dear? She asked, curiously examining the patches on his vest. Sadoy nodded. He was thrown out on the road. From a car, he replied briefly. The woman's face contorted with indignation. Monsters, such a little thing. May God bless you guys. And I thought... She didn't finish, but everyone understood. She thought badly of them. And this little puppy, without knowing it, began to break down the wall of prejudice that the bikers had long been accustomed to seeing around them. An hour later, Doc came out of the observation room. He took off his gloves and rubbed his forehead wearily. He'll live. He'll even be able to run, probably without limping. But he needs care. Peace, warmth, and good food. And a home, of course. Everyone looked at Tanya. Without hesitation, she said, He'll come with me, temporarily, until we find him a home. The grim-faced man muttered something, but no one heard him. The gray-haired man just nodded briefly, approving her decision. When they left the clinic, Rocky was sleeping in a cardboard box covered with a clean diaper. He was weak, but breathing evenly. Marina brought them a bag with medicine and special food. The money, Tanya began, taking out her wallet. But the nurse stopped her. Pyotr Semenovich said he doesn't take money from heroes, she smiled. It was so unexpected that even Kamuri raised an eyebrow in surprise. They took Rocky to their clubhouse, a large converted garage on the industrial outskirts of the city. It smelled of gasoline, metal, and freedom. Inside were a dismantled motorcycle, work benches with tools, an old sofa, and a pool table. This place was their fortress. Tanya immediately began to make a place for Rocky. She found a wooden box from under some spare parts, lined it with old but clean rags, and put her second leather jacket on top. Soft, worn, smelling of her. She placed bowls of water and soaked food next to it. Rocky woke up and looked around fearfully, but then, sensing a familiar smell, climbed onto the jacket, curled up, and fell asleep again. The men watched Tanya silently. There was nothing of the sharp tornado they knew in her movements. She was focused and gentle. So, broke the silence Gray, sitting down on the sofa. The puppy is safe. Now let's get back to our farmer. Hamorny immediately sat up, his fists clenched again. I found him, he said hoarsely. Sidorchuk Ivan Petrovich. His farm is 3 kilometers from that place. He lives alone, it seems. What do you suggest? Asked Sadoy calmly, even though he already knew the answer. Go and talk to him. Our way. A dangerous gleam flashed in Hamori's eyes. So that he'll remember for the rest of his life not to hurt the weak. Doc shook his head. Sergei, that's a bad idea. You'll make a mess, and in the end, we'll be the ones to blame. There are laws, there are animal protection services. Laws? The grim one exploded. What laws? They'll fine him 3 kopecks? And the puppy almost died. No, Doc. You can't use the law with people like that. You have to make them understand. He looked at Sadoy for support, but the club leader remained silent, staring intently at his hands. Old white scars were visible on his knuckles. He knew all too well where righteous anger unchecked by reason could lead. Revenge is a dish best not served at all, he finally said quietly. It poisons the one who prepares it. Tanya, having finished with Rocky, approached them. I agree with Gloomy, she said unexpectedly. We can't just leave it like this. This Sidorchuk has to understand what he's done. But maybe there's another way. Without fists. The tension in the garage was palpable. On the one hand, there was the desire for immediate and harsh justice, embodied by Gloomy. On the other, there was the caution and wisdom of Sadoy and Doc. And Tanya, who seemed to be looking for a third way. Everyone waited for the leader's decision. Sadoy raised his head. His gaze was heavy. We'll go to him. Tomorrow morning. I will go with Hamuri. Sergei raised his head, a flash of victory in his eyes. But Sadoy continued, looking straight at him. But you will remain silent. I will do the talking. If you say a word without my permission or move a muscle, don't blame anyone but yourself. We're not going there to punish him. We're going to look him in the eye. And understand. Do you understand? Kamiri clenched his teeth but nodded. He didn't like the conditions, but he couldn't disobey Sadoy. He knew that if they went together, he would still have a chance to do what he thought was right. That night, Tanya didn't go home. She stayed at the club, settling into a chair next to the box where Rocky was sleeping. Several times during the night, she woke up to his quiet whimpering and gave him water from a dropper. The puppy shuddered and twitched his paws in his sleep, dreaming of falling in pain. On the other side of town, on his farm, farmer Ivan Petrovich Sidorchuk was also awake. He sat at the table and stared out the dark window. He wasn't thinking about the puppy. He was thinking about the bills he had to pay, his sick wife in the district hospital, and the fact that it hadn't rained in a month and his crops were dying in the fields. He didn't feel like a villain. He felt like a cornered animal, biting off its own paw to escape the trap. He didn't yet know that tomorrow morning 2 black motorcycles would pull into his yard, and his desperate, hopeless life would take another, most unexpected turn. The next morning, 2 motorcycles, Sadoy's heavy, solid chopper and Kamuroy's aggressive, sporty bike, turned off the asphalt onto a dirt road leading to Sidorchuk's farm. The dust kicked up by the wheels immediately settled on the roadside burdocks. Kamuri rode slightly behind, his whole figure tense. He had spent the whole night going over the upcoming conversation in his head, and every scenario ended the same way, with the farmer's broken nose. The gray-haired man was completely calm. He drove the motorcycle confidently and smoothly, as if not noticing the potholes. He was not thinking about revenge, but about the reasons. He had seen enough cruelty in his life to know that it always had a root, and often it lay not in malice, but in despair. The farm was exactly as he had imagined it. A crooked fence, an old house with peeling paint, and the rusty skeleton of a tractor by the barn. Several chickens clucked in the yard. When the motorcycles pulled into the yard and the engines died, there was a deafening silence. Ivan Petrovich came out onto the porch. He was without a cap, and his sparse gray hair was tousled by the wind. Seeing the bikers, he did not flinch. His face, already grim, turned to stone. He was clutching an old tire iron in his hand. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely, not moving from the spot. The gray-haired man slowly took off his helmet and hung it on the handlebars. He looked the farmer straight in the eye. "We're here about the puppy you threw out on the road yesterday," he said calmly. Ivan Petrovich's gaze wavered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I don't have any puppy. You've got the wrong address," he muttered. clutching the tire iron more tightly. The grim-faced man took a step forward, but the gray-haired man stopped him with a barely perceptible movement of his hand. "Don't lie, Petrovich. We saw your car. We saw the license plate. We saw you," the gray-haired man continued in an even voice. "The puppy is alive. We picked him up. He had a dislocated paw and was dehydrated. He's fine now." "Well, thank God," the farmer snapped. "Take him if you're so kind. I don't need him." The grim one couldn't take it anymore. "You don't need him," he roared, jumping up. "You threw him in the ditch like a piece of trash. Do you even understand what you've done, you old bastard?" He almost ran up to the porch, but Gray blocked his way, standing between him and the farmer. He simply placed his hand on Sergei's chest, and Sergei froze, breathing heavily. "I said, be quiet," Gray-haired said quietly, but with icy emphasis. He turned back to the farmer, who had backed away from Gray-haired's furious lunge and raised the crowbar. "Put that thing down, Petrovich. We didn't come here to fight. I want to understand," Gray-haired said. "Why?" This simple question, asked without threat or malice, took Ivan Petrovich by surprise. He had expected anything: threats, a fight, demands for money. But not this. He lowered the crowbar, and his shoulders slumped. "What's it to you?" he croaked, but without his former confidence. "I care about everything that happens on my land," replied the gray-haired man. And suddenly the farmer burst out. He spoke incoherently, angrily, spitting out words like bitter poison. He talked about debts, about a loan for seeds that he had no way of repaying, about his wife, who was in the city with cancer, and how all their money was going to medicine, about the drought that was destroying the harvest, about how his bitch had given birth, and he had managed to find homes for 5 of the puppies. But this one was born with a sick paw. "Defective!" he shouted, his eyes filled with tears of anger and helplessness. "Who needs a cripple? How am I supposed to feed it? How am I supposed to pay for its treatment? I don't have enough money for my wife, and I'm supposed to treat a dog. I'm not a monster, I'm just trying to survive. How can I do that?" He fell silent, breathing heavily, and turned away so that the bikers couldn't see his face. The grim-faced man stood as if struck by lightning. In his black and white world, where there were only good and bad, unpleasant gray shades suddenly appeared. He wanted to hate this old man, but for some reason he couldn't. He didn't see a monster in front of him, but a broken, desperate man. The gray-haired man was silent for a long time. Then he went to the well, scooped up a bucket of water, poured it into an iron mug, and handed it to the farmer. The latter looked at him suspiciously, but took the water and drank it in one gulp. "We won't report this to the police, Petrovich," said the gray-haired man. "Although we could. But I want you to understand something. What you did is not a solution. It's rock bottom. When a person starts solving their problems at the expense of those who are weaker and more defenseless, they cease to be human. We understand your problems, but the puppy is not to blame for them." He turned and walked to his motorcycle. Gloomy and still stunned, he followed him. As they were starting their engines, Ivan Petrovich called after them. How is he?" he asked quietly, without raising his head. "His name is Rocky," replied Sadoy, without turning around. "And he'll be fine. He has a family now." They drove away, leaving the farmer alone in his overgrown yard. Ivan Petrovich stood there for a long time, watching them go, then slowly sank down onto the steps of the porch and covered his face with his hands. For the first time in a long time, he felt ashamed. Meanwhile, at the club, Tanya did something that would change their lives forever. She took a photo of Rocky sleeping on her leather jacket and posted it on the city's social media group. She wrote a short, angry, and honest post about how they found him, about how someone decided that a little life was worthless. She didn't mention the bikers or ask for help. She just wanted to vent her anger. She couldn't have imagined that this post would be the spark that would set off an explosion that would rock Upper Yar. The post Tanya threw into cyberspace took on a life of its own. For the first few hours, there were only a few sympathetic comments from her few friends. Tanya, exhausted by the events of the day, fell asleep right in her chair and didn't see how the thin stream turned into a torrent and then into a veritable tsunami. One of the subscribers to the city group, impressed by the story, shared it on his page. One of his friends was a local blogger who ran a modest public page called News of Upper Yar. He immediately copied the text and photo, adding a loud headline of his own. Tough bikers rescue puppy thrown into the road. Heroes where you least expect them. And it worked like a detonator. By morning, the post had gathered thousands of likes and hundreds of reposts. For a town with a population of 50,000, it was an event of incredible magnitude. The comments were boiling with passion. People cursed the unknown farmer, admired the puppy, and most importantly, discussed the bikers. The photo of tiny Rocky sleeping against a backdrop of rough leather and Steel Brothers patches broke all the molds. Some wrote, "I've always been afraid of them, but it turns out they're just like that." Others added, "Real men, not the ones sitting on couches, but the ones who get things done." There were also skeptics. It's all staged for likes. But their voices were drowned out by the general chorus of admiration. The story spread across the internet, gaining new, fictional details. Someone wrote that the bikers caught up with the farmer and forced him to apologize on his knees. Someone claimed that they bought all the puppies in the area and were building a shelter for them. No one cared about the reality anymore. The city was creating a new legend for itself. Doc was the first to sound the alarm. He woke up before everyone else and, out of habit, went online. Seeing what was happening in the city group, he immediately woke Tanya. She looked at the phone screen sleepily, and her face slowly stretched in amazement. I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I was just angry." By this time, Hamuri had also woken up. He read the post and some of the most popular comments, and his face twisted into a contemptuous smile. "Hypocrites," he muttered. "Yesterday they were shunning us on the street, and today they're confessing their love. Heroes. Ugh!" He kicked an empty canister. "Be quiet. You'll wake Rocky," Tanya hissed at him. The puppy, hearing the noise, did indeed whimper in his box. Tanya immediately sat down next to him and began to calm him down. Gray was the last to wake up. He listened silently to Doc's excited story, read the post and several comments. He showed neither surprise nor anger. He just stared at one point, thinking intently about something. "Well, Commander, are we going to deny everything?" asked Gloomy defiantly. Gray-haired man looked at him with a heavy gaze. "It's too late to deny it, Sergei. What happened has already happened. What matters is what we do about it now." At that moment, someone knocked insistently but timidly on the heavy gate of their garage. Everyone froze. Strangers never came to their fortress. Gloomy tensed, ready for anything. Gray-haired gestured for him to stay where he was and went to the gate himself. He opened the heavy door and saw a short, elderly woman standing on the threshold. She was cowering against the doorframe, holding a large plastic bag in her hands. I'm sorry," she stammered, looking at the mighty figure of the gray-haired man. I read on the internet about the dog. I live nearby. Here, here's some buckwheat porridge with meat and a bag of dry food. Please take it." She held out the bag. Sedoy took it silently. He looked at the woman, then at the bag in his hands. He had expected trouble, police, journalists, but not porridge. "Thank you," was all he could say. The woman nodded fearfully, turned around, and almost ran away around the corner. Sedoy closed the gate and returned to the others. He silently placed the bag on the workbench. Everyone looked at him. It was the first drop, the first real, tangible drop of the storm they themselves had caused online. The day brought even more surprises. The phone number for the auto repair shop listed on Tanya's profile was ringing off the hook. They weren't calling to make appointments. People were offering money, medicine, and wanted to come and see Rocky. Tanya responded to everyone curtly and sharply, saying they didn't need any help. She felt as if hundreds of strangers had invaded her personal life. He was gloomy all day, walking around with a face darker than the clouds and making snide comments about the armchair rescuers. By lunchtime, they realized that fame was not only pleasant, but also very tiring. They locked the gate and tried not to make any noise so as not to attract attention. Rocky, meanwhile, was feeling better. He was already trying to stand on his injured paw and even showed interest in a toy that Tanya had made for him out of an old knot of rope. He became the center of their little universe. His defenselessness and trustfulness had a soothing effect on these harsh people. Around him, they became simpler, kinder, more genuine. Towards evening, when the commotion seemed to be dying down, there was another knock at the gate. This time, it was insistent and loud. "Who the hell is it now?" Grumpy cursed. Gray-haired went to open the door again. Standing on the threshold was a young woman of about 30, in tears. She was in a panic. "Are you the Steele brothers?" she blurted out. "Help me, I beg you. I don't know who else to turn to." "What happened?" Gray asked calmly. "A kitten," the woman replied, gasping for breath. "He climbed into the ventilation pipe on the roof of our house. It's been screaming for hours and can't get out. I called the emergency services, but they said they don't respond to calls like this. The management company told me to wait for a repairman until tomorrow. It'll die there." She looked at Gray with hope. For her, he and his friends were her last resort, the heroes from the internet who could do anything. Silence fell in the garage. Everyone understood that this was a test. The same question that Gray-haired had asked that morning. What are we going to do with this now? They could have just closed the gate in front of her. Say that they weren't a rescue service, just mechanics. That would have been logical and correct. But looking into the desperate eyes of this woman, they knew they couldn't. Hamori sighed heavily and went to get the toolbox. Doc began asking the woman about the diameter of the pipe and the height of the building. Tanya found a coil of strong rope. The decision was made without words. The gray-haired man looked at his friends, and a hint of pride appeared in his eyes. He turned to the woman. "Give us the address." The rescue operation turned out to be more complicated than they thought. It was a 5-story Khrushchevka with a flat roof. The ventilation shaft went deep down. According to Doc's estimate, the kitten was stuck somewhere on the 4th floor. It meowed pitifully, and its squeaks echoed in the pipe. The residents of the house poured into the courtyard and watched what was happening with curiosity. The appearance of the biker team in full gear caused a sensation. Someone recognized them from photos on the internet and began whispering. The grim-faced man, who had been assigned the most dangerous job, tied a rope around himself. Gray and Doc held him by the safety rope. Sergei, armed with a flashlight and a special long-handled grappling hook that he had made himself on the fly, began to slowly descend head first into the narrow, dark opening of the shaft. Tanya stood below, coordinating their actions via the walkie-talkie they used during their trips. "Take it to the left, Sergei. There's a ledge," she commanded. "I see it." Khmuri's muffled voice came through the radio. The tension was at its peak. Any awkward movement could cost the kitten its life and Sergei serious injury. Finally, after several agonizing minutes, the radio crackled. "Got it! I got him!" Applause rang out in the yard. When Khmuroi was pulled up, he was covered in dust and cobwebs. But he was carefully holding a tiny, frightened gray kitten in his hands. He handed it to its owner, who immediately burst into tears of gratitude. Sergei tried to maintain his usual sullen expression, but the corners of his lips involuntarily turned upward. At that moment, as the bikers, tired but satisfied, gathered their equipment, a young man with a camera on his shoulder and a microphone in his hand appeared from around the corner of the house. It was the same blogger who had started the wave of their popularity. "Amazing, just amazing," he exclaimed, pointing his camera at Sadoy. "Andrei Volkov, Sadoy. The whole city is talking about you. Tell me, is this your new calling? To save those whom the official services have abandoned?" Sadoy frowned. He couldn't stand journalists and publicity. "No comment," he snapped, trying to walk past. But the guy wouldn't give up. He stepped aside, blocking his way and shoving the microphone right in his face. "People call you the guardian angels of Upper Yar. But there are also those who think it's just a PR stunt by a group of ex-convicts." He blurted out in one breath, looking straight into the camera lens. "So, who are you really, the Steele brothers? And what can the city expect from you tomorrow?" The blogger's question hung in the evening air like a grenade. The camera continued to roll, its red light glowing like a predatory eye. Kumi took a step forward, his face darkening with anger. Another second, and he would have snatched the microphone from the guy's hands and explained to him who the former criminals were. But Gray-haired was quicker. He placed his heavy hand on Sergei's shoulder, and Sergei froze, as if he had stumbled upon an invisible wall. The leader of the Steele brothers looked calmly into the camera lens. There was no anger or fear on his face, only boundless fatigue and steely confidence. "We are who we are," he said in an even, calm voice, which, however, was accompanied by the rumble of his motorcycle engine. "We are mechanics. Yesterday we couldn't drive past a puppy in a ditch. Today we couldn't drive past a kitten in a pipe." He paused, letting his words sink into the silence. "Whether you consider us heroes or criminals is up to you. We've got work to do. All the best." With that, he turned and, without looking back at the stunned blogger, walked to his motorcycle. The others followed him as if on cue. They started their engines, and the deafening roar of 4 engines was the best answer to all questions. They drove away, leaving the blogger standing in the middle of the yard with a sensation that turned out to be not at all what he expected. He didn't get a scandal, but a parable. And it was 1,000 times more powerful. Back in the garage, the tension that everyone had been holding back burst out. "Criminals," growled Khmuri, hitting the metal workbench with his fist. The toolbox rattled. "Where did he even get that?" Tanya, who was checking on Rocky, flinched. "Serge, stop it," she said sharply. "You're scaring everyone." Gloomy stopped and looked guiltily at the box where the puppy was stirring. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Doc sat down wearily on the sofa. "He was just looking for a hot topic, Serge. Dirt always sells better than kindness. And you, well, you know." Camille became even more gloomy. Yes, he knew. He had a criminal record, received at the age of 18 for fighting. He had stood up for a girl, but went too far. 2 years probation. That tale followed him everywhere. It was Gray who took him under his wing, brought him to his workshop, and taught him to work with his hands instead of his fists. For Sergei, the Steel Brothers weren't just a club. They were a family that took him in when everyone else turned their backs on him. "My past is my business," he said, but he threw it in everyone's face. Sadoy, who had been silently taking off his vest, turned to him. "Your past made you who you are," he said firmly. "Strong, intolerant of injustice. You went into that pipe, risking your neck, not because you're a good guy. It's because you know what it's like to be locked in the dark, waiting for help. And it doesn't matter what people like that guy say. What matters is what we do. Right now." He nodded toward Rocky, who was sleeping peacefully. The argument was irrefutable. The grim-faced man fell silent, but his anger did not subside, only sinking deeper, turning into cold determination. He would show this town who they were, not with words, but with deeds. At that very moment, in the dreary corridor of the district hospital, Farmer Ivan Petrovich Sidorchuk was waiting to be allowed to see his wife. The local news was playing on a small, old TV set hanging from the ceiling. Suddenly, he saw familiar faces. Those same bikers. The report was enthusiastically recounting the miraculous rescue of a kitten. Then they showed the same fragment of the interview in the courtyard. Ivan Petrovich heard the blogger's question about former criminals. He tensed, expecting an angry reaction. But then he heard Sadoy's calm and dignified answer. The farmer stared at the screen, and something strange was happening in his soul. These people, whom he considered gangsters, whom he had met with crowbars in their hands, did not try to justify themselves or threaten him. They simply did what they thought was right. They saved a kitten. They saved a puppy that he had thrown out. The shame he had felt yesterday returned with renewed force, burning him from within. He sat huddled on the hard hospital bench and for the first time in many years felt not just miserable, but wrong. He, Ivan Petrovich Sidorchuk, who had considered himself an honest worker all his life, had ended up on the side of evil. And these criminals on motorcycles were on the side of good. His world had been turned upside down. The next day, reality hit the Steel Brothers with full force. Their fame, reinforced by the new report, became absolute. From early morning, people began to gather at the gates of their garage. But now, they weren't coming empty-handed. An elderly woman brought a cardboard box with 5 newborn puppies squealing inside. They had been abandoned at the entrance. An hour later, a teenage boy arrived holding a wounded pigeon. Then a woman whose parrot had flown away came and begged for help finding it in the trees. By noon, their garage had turned into a branch of Noah's Ark. Rocky watched the new guests jealously from his box. Doc was torn in two, trying to give everyone first aid. Tanya tried to organize some semblance of order, while Gloomy grimly built enclosures out of whatever materials he could find. The money people left for food was catastrophically insufficient. They ran out of medicine, bandages, and diapers. The bikers, accustomed to freedom and independence, found themselves trapped. They became hostages to their good deed and the heroic image they had created around themselves. They couldn't just kick everyone out. The gray-haired man silently watched the chaos. He understood that they had reached a new crossroads. Either they would give up everything and return to their old lives, branded as frauds, or they would have to accept this new role to the end. But how? They were just mechanics. In the evening, when the stream of visitors finally dried up and relative silence reigned in the garage, broken only by the squeaking of puppies and the cooing of pigeons, the phone rang. It was a woman, her voice trembling with tears and despair. "I beg you," she said incoherently. "Help. The Zarechi Cottage community. A dog has been abandoned there. The owners sold the house and left. They left the dog chained up. The neighbors say he's been there for 2 weeks. We've been feeding him, throwing food over the fence. But he's become emaciated and started attacking everyone. Yesterday, he stopped responding to food and just growls. We called the police and animal control. They all refused. They say it's private property and the dog is aggressive, so it needs to be put down, and that's a whole procedure. He'll die there of hunger and despair." The woman sobbed into the phone. The gray-haired man listened, his face turning to stone. This was no longer about rescuing a kitten from a pipe. This was a completely different story. Illegal trespassing on private property. An aggressive, large animal, crazed with hunger and fear. The risk was enormous. And the law was not on their side. He looked at his friends. They had all heard the conversation. Tanya looked at him anxiously. The grim-faced man clenched his fists. Doc rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "What do we do, Commander?" he asked quietly. The gray-haired man slowly put the phone down on the lever. "Check the motorcycles. Get the tools ready, bolt cutters. Doc, take everything you have that will calm it down. And a noose. We're leaving in an hour. We'll go when it gets dark." Night fell quickly on Verkhny Yar, hiding the city under a dark veil. 4 motorcycles without lights glided almost silently through the deserted streets, heading for an abandoned cottage village. The atmosphere was oppressive. This was not a pleasure trip, but a foray into enemy territory. The village of Zarechi greeted them with dead silence and boarded-up windows. They found the right place, a high fence made of corrugated iron, with a heavy barn lock on the gate. Not a sound came from behind the fence. "Maybe it's too late," Tanya whispered doubtfully. "Or maybe he's just conserving his strength," replied Doc, preparing a syringe with a tranquilizer. Hamori took out a bolt cutter. With a loud click, the lock fell. The gate creaked open, revealing a yard overgrown with weeds and the dark silhouette of a house. The gray-haired man gestured for everyone to stay where they were. He and the grim one, armed with powerful flashlights, were the first to step onto the property. The silence was deafening. They moved slowly toward the house, the beams of their flashlights picking out a rusty barrel, an overturned wheelbarrow, and wild rose bushes from the darkness. Suddenly, from the depths of the yard, from around the corner of the house, a low, guttural growl sounded. The sound made the blood freeze in their veins. It was not a bark, but a warning, full of pain and hatred. The gray-haired man stopped Hamori. "Stop, let him see us." At that moment, the clanking of chains rang out from the darkness, and then a huge sheepdog appeared in the circle of light. The dog was emaciated, its bones covered with matted fur, but its eyes burned in the darkness with a primitive fury. He stood on trembling legs, but his whole posture spoke of a willingness to die, but not to give up. Doc slowly raised his rifle with the syringe, but before he could take aim, the dog let out a desperate, hoarse bark and, pulling the chain to its limit, lunged forward. The chain, old and rusty, snapped with a deafening crack right at the collar. A huge, starving shadow, ignoring Doc, leaped straight at Sullen, who was standing closest. There was no time to think. Instincts honed over years in situations he never spoke of worked faster than thought. The moment the sheepdog left the ground in its deadly leap, Gray did the same. He didn't try to run away or jump out of the way. He lunged forward, putting all his weight into the movement. He struck the dog in the side with his shoulder, knocking it off course. It was enough to save Komori's throat. But he couldn't completely avoid the blow. Instead of sinking its teeth into his neck, the crazed dog clamped its jaws onto Sergei's forearm, which he had instinctively put up to protect himself. There was a dull, wet crunch. Komori did not cry out. He only growled hoarsely in pain and rage, trying to tear the animal away from him. The gray-haired man fell to the ground with the dog and immediately pinned it down with all his weight, trying to hold it to the ground. Tanya rushed toward them with the flashlight, illuminating the tangle of writhing bodies. "Shoot, Doc, shoot!" she shouted. Doc, whose hands had frozen in shock for a moment, finally came to his senses. He caught the sheepdog's flailing side in his sights and pulled the trigger. There was a soft thud. The syringe pierced the muscle. But the tranquilizer did not take effect immediately. The dog continued to fight desperately, growling and struggling. Grimacing in pain, Sadoy twisted around and struck the dog on the nose with the palm of his hand as hard as he could. This stunned the dog for a second, causing it to open its jaws. At that moment, Gray-haired was finally able to pin it to the ground. After a few more seconds of struggle, the animal suddenly went limp. Its furious growling was replaced by a quiet, plaintive whimper, and then fell silent altogether. The dog fell asleep. It ended as suddenly as it had begun. In the deafening silence, only Komori's heavy, ragged breathing could be heard. "Light!" Sadoy commanded, getting up from the ground. Tanya shone the flashlight on Sergei's arm. The sight was horrific. The thick fabric of his jacket and sweater were torn to shreds. Dark blood flowed profusely from deep lacerations. "Quick, to the garage," Doc commanded, already taking a tourniquet and antiseptics out of his bag. "This is serious. An artery could have been hit. He needs rabies shots right away." The Steele brothers' garage was transformed into an operating room. While Doc, cursing under his breath, cleaned and stitched the wounds on Komori's arm, Tanya took care of the sleeping sheepdog. She spread an old blanket on the floor and carefully dragged the heavy, emaciated body onto it. She washed the dirt off its fur and treated the wounds on its paws, which had been rubbed raw from constantly walking in circles on the chain. She saw that it wasn't an old dog, but a very young one, no more than 3 years old. Beneath the layer of dirt and despair lay a once beautiful and strong animal. She brought a bowl of water and placed it nearby so that when he woke up, the first thing he would see was water, not enemies. He sat on a chair, pale, his arm bandaged, and watched her silently. There was no hatred for the dog in his eyes, only cold, burning rage toward those who had brought her to this state. "Let's call him Caesar," he said quietly. He was betrayed by those he trusted most. Tanya nodded without turning around. She understood him without words. "Caesar," she repeated, stroking the dog's head. "That's a good name." They sat like that until almost morning. Doc gave Komori a painkiller, and he dozed off in his chair. Caesar slept under the influence of the tranquilizer. Tanya took care of the other patients. Gray stood at the gate and looked at the pre-dawn sky. He felt the situation spiraling out of control. They had crossed the line. Illegal entry, a wounded comrade, an aggressive dog that should have been put down according to the rules. He had taken on an unbearable burden, both for himself and his club. And he didn't know what to do next. Problems were not long in coming. Around 10 in the morning, when they were exhausted and sleep-deprived, drinking bitter instant coffee, a police UAZ slowly pulled up to the gate of their garage. Out stepped the local police captain, Sokolov, a middle-aged man with a tired, expressionless face. The Steele brothers knew him, and he knew them. Until now, their paths had crossed rarely and only in minor matters. "Hey, Volkov," Sokolov said, approaching Sadoy. "You too, Captain," replied Sadoy, stepping forward to meet him. "I hear you've become heroes?" asked the local police officer without any irony, glancing over Sadoy's shoulder into the garage. "The whole town is buzzing." "We're just doing our job," replied Sadoy vaguely. "Working, you say?" Sokolov drawled. "Well, I got a report today. From neighbors in the Zareshi cottage community. A break-in. They say someone cut the lock off the gate at number 17 last night. And the dog that was there is gone. You don't know anything about this, Volkov?" The captain's gaze was direct and attentive. He wasn't accusing anyone. He was simply stating the facts. A tense silence hung in the garage. Tanya froze with the bowl in her hands. The gloomy man, sitting with his back to the entrance, slowly turned around. His bandaged hand lay on his knee, impossible to hide. Sokolov glanced at Sergei's hand, then at the huge sheepdog, which was beginning to wake up and stir on its blanket, and his eyebrows slowly crept upward. "Right," he said in a different, more official tone. "The picture is becoming clearer. So, Volkov, I have a report of a break-in. You have a wounded man, and judging by all appearances, a stolen dog that bit him. I need to file a report. And the dog, as aggressive and illegally present here, will have to be taken away. I'm calling animal control." "You're not taking him." Komori's muffled voice rang out. He slowly rose from his chair and stepped forward. "Sit down, Sergei," the gray-haired man said authoritatively, without turning around. He looked at the captain again. "Sokolov, let's skip the report. The dog was left to die. We saved it. Yes, we cut the lock. I'm willing to pay the fine. The guy is to blame. He was careless. He has no complaints about the dog." "Volkov, you're not a child," sighed the district police officer wearily. "These aren't my rules. There's a law, private property, aggressive animal. I can't just turn a blind eye to this. If something else happens to this dog, who will be responsible? Me, because I didn't react." He was already reaching for his radio. The gray-haired man realized they were at an impasse. Any resistance would only make things worse. Now they would all be taken to the station, and Caesar would be taken to the pound. All their efforts, all the risk, had been for nothing. At that most tense moment, when it seemed that everything had already been decided, an old, rusty pickup truck pulled up at the garage gate. Ivan Petrovich Sidorchuk got out, groaning. He was carrying 2 large sacks filled with potatoes. He saw the police car, the local cop, and the grim-looking bikers, and froze in indecision. He had come here to at least try to make amends for his guilt. He didn't know what to say. He had simply brought them the only thing he had, part of his meager harvest. But he had stumbled into the middle of a new drama. Sokolov turned at the sound of the approaching car. "Who are you?" he asked the farmer. Ivan Petrovich silently watched the scene in the garage. He saw the young biker's bandaged arm. He saw the huge, skinny sheepdog on the floor. He saw the despair in the eyes of these stern men. And he heard the words of the local police officer about the stolen dog and the dog catcher. Something clicked in his head. All his shame, all his belated remorse suddenly took shape. He had found a way. Without waiting for a response from the farmer, Sokolov turned back to Sadoy. "So, Volkov, I'm asking you for the last time. Do you admit that you trespassed on private property and cut the lock? The gray-haired man was silent, searching for words. Any answer would be a losing one. At that moment, the silence was broken by the hoarse, uncertain voice of Ivan Petrovich. I asked them to do it. Everyone, including Captain Sokolov, turned sharply toward the farmer. He took a step forward, overcoming his fear. I asked them to cut the lock, he repeated louder, looking straight into the eyes of the stunned police officer. And to take the dog, because that dog is mine. The silence that hung in the garage became almost palpable. Captain Sokolov slowly turned to Ivan Petrovich, his face expressing extreme bewilderment. Your dog? He asked, squinting. Petrovich, are you sure you're not mistaken? This property belongs to the Kovalevs. They moved to Moscow a year ago. The farmer's lie was so clumsy, so obvious, that it seemed it would crumble at the slightest touch of reality. Sade, Tanya, and Kamori froze, not understanding what was happening. They had expected anything but their sworn enemy, the man who had started it all, suddenly showing up and trying to cover for them. Ivan Petrovich swallowed, his Adam's apple jerking. He knew he looked foolish, but it was too late to back down. The Kovalevs are the Kovalevs, he croaked, but they left me with their dog, to take care of. I'm an old friend of theirs. And then they disappeared, not answering my calls. And I have my own farm. I can't feed such a crowd. So I asked the guys to help me find a home for them. They're lifesavers now. The whole town knows them. He spoke, looking away, afraid to meet the district police officer's gaze. Sokolov listened to this rambling story, his tired face expressing nothing but mild annoyance. He knew perfectly well that the farmer was lying. But this lie, however clumsy, gave him something he didn't have 5 minutes ago, a way out of the situation. It created a legal loophole. Now it was no longer trespassing and theft, but acting in the interests of the owner with his verbal consent. The case was falling apart before it had even begun. So you're saying it's your dog? The local cop asked thoughtfully, looking not at the farmer, but at Caesar, who, finally awake, struggled to lift his head. Mine, Ivan Petrovich said more firmly. And you have no claims against Citizen Orlov? Sokolov nodded at Kamori. Regarding the bite? What claims? He saved my dog. I should thank him. The farmer got into character and spoke almost confidently. Sokolov sighed heavily. He approached Caesar, crouched down, and looked closely into the dog's eyes. The dog did not growl. It only blinked wearily. There was no aggression in its gaze, only bottomless melancholy. All right, the police officer finally said, standing up. There's no report of a break-in from the Kovalevs anyway. Since you, Petrovich, are responsible for the dog and have no complaints, there's no problem. But Volkov, he looked sternly at Sadoy. This is the first and last time. One more unauthorized rescue operation like this, and I'll lock you all up, regardless of your heroic reputation, and sort out the dog. It can't stay in the city without registration and vaccinations. Consider this an official warning. He turned around and, without saying another word, headed for his car. A minute later, the UAZ disappeared behind the gate, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and the stunned participants of the failed drama. When the sound of the police car faded away, Ivan Petrovich slumped down. He shifted his confused gaze from the bikers to the 2 sacks of potatoes that were still lying on the ground. And it seemed that only now did he realize what he had done. Here, he muttered, pointing to the sacks. I brought this as a thank you for the puppy. The gray-haired man slowly approached him. He looked at this broken, unhappy old man who had just possibly saved them all, and felt neither anger nor gratitude. Only a complex, heavy feeling. "Why did you do that, Petrovich?" he asked quietly. The farmer looked up at him with faded eyes. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I saw you on TV, how you saved the kitten. And then I felt ashamed. I'm not an animal commander. It's just that life has squeezed me so hard that I can't breathe." He fell silent, then added, looking at Caesar, "I feel sorry for the dog. It's not human to chain up a friend like that." Kamiri, who had been silently watching the scene, approached the farmer. He stopped in front of him and looked first at his bandaged arm, then into the old man's eyes. Ivan Petrovich flinched, expecting a blow or angry words. But Kamuri simply held out his uninjured hand. "Thank you, Father," he said hoarsely. The farmer hesitantly shook the outstretched hand. This simple gesture meant more than any words. It broke down the wall between them. At that moment, they ceased to be enemies. They became just two people, each of whom had made mistakes and was now trying to correct them. The news that the Steele brothers had rescued another dog, and at such risk, spread through the city instantly. Now their reputation was cemented. But along with it, their problems grew. The number of abandoned animals increased every day. Their garage turned into a 24-hour shelter. They were desperately short of money. Tanya, who had taken on all the organizational work, was running herself ragged. Doc hardly ever left the garage, becoming a full-time veterinarian. Sidi and Kamuri tried to work in the workshop to earn some money, but they were constantly distracted. They realized that this couldn't go on for long. They were drowning. In the evening, when all the animals had been fed and a fragile peace had settled in the garage, Sadie gathered everyone together. "We need to make a decision," he said. "We can't turn the club into a shelter. We can't handle it, neither physically nor financially." "And what do you suggest? Throw them back out on the street?" Tanya asked sharply, her voice betraying her accumulated fatigue. "No," Gray-haired replied calmly. "I suggest we stop fighting the consequences and try to tackle the cause. There's an old, abandoned municipal shelter in the city. It hasn't been used for 5 years. It has a building and grounds, but there's no money to restore and maintain it. The authorities don't care." "So what?" asked Hamuri, confused. "We'll make them pay attention to it." A familiar steely gleam appeared in Gray's eyes. "We'll organize a city charity festival, with music, food, contests. We'll gather all the people who care, and we'll donate all the proceeds to restoring the shelter. We'll show them that there are many of us, and that we care." The idea was bold, almost crazy. 4 bikers against an entire system. But it had that strength that had always distinguished the Steele brothers. They never backed down in the face of adversity. "I'll talk to the local rock bands," Tanya said immediately. "I know a lot of them. And I can organize a field kitchen," Doc said unexpectedly. "My army experience will come in handy." "And Gloomy began and faltered. "I can organize a strength show. I can lift weights and bend nails. People love that kind of thing." Gray looked at his team. They were together again, united by one big, almost impossible goal. "Then let's get to work, brothers," he said. "We don't have much time." The last 2 weeks before the festival turned into one long marathon. The Steele brothers used all their fame and all their connections. Tanya really did manage to get the best bands in town to agree to perform for free. Gloomy recruited some athletes he knew. Doc organized the purchase of food. Gray-haired led the toughest negotiations with the city administration. The officials initially dismissed him, But faced with his unyielding persistence and growing support from the townspeople on social media, they were forced to give in. They gave permission for the festival to be held in the Central Park and even provided a stage. The town was buzzing. Everyone was talking about the upcoming event. The Steele brothers became a symbol of change. They were written about in newspapers and discussed on park benches. They had achieved what no one before them had been able to do: unite very different people around a common, noble goal. On the day of the festival, the park was packed from early morning. The whole city had gathered. There were mothers with children, punks, officials in suits, and elderly pensioners. Music blared from the stage. Nearby, Doc's field kitchen was smoking, spreading the mouth-watering smell of buckwheat porridge with stew. On a separate platform, Kamuri and his strongman friends bent rebar and juggled heavy weights to the enthusiastic cheers of the crowd. But the center of it all was a small, fenced-in area with a sign that read, "Our charges." There, in enclosures, sat all the animals rescued by the bikers. And the main hero, of course, was Rocky. He had grown and gotten stronger, and his paw had almost healed. He played happily with the children, letting them pet him, and seemed to enjoy the attention. Next to him, in a separate large enclosure, Caesar lay quietly. He was still thin, but there was no longer any fear or anger in his eyes, only calm dignity. He was a living symbol that even the most devoted heart can be healed with care. The donation boxes filled up at an incredible speed. By evening, it was clear that the amount collected would exceed all expectations. Sadoy stood a little apart, watching it all, and for the first time in a long time, there was a smile on his face. Ivan Petrovich approached him. He was dressed in a clean shirt and looked somehow younger. He silently handed Sadoy a large basket of selected, ripe apples. "These are from my garden," he said. "Take them, for the common cause." Sadoy took the basket. "Thank you, Petrovich. Your help back then, it was very important." The farmer nodded and looked at the enclosure where Caesar raised his head and looked in their direction. "I've been thinking, Commander," said Ivan Petrovich, without taking his eyes off the dog. "My wife will be back from the hospital soon. She needs company, and a watchman wouldn't hurt around the farm. Maybe you could give him to me? I won't hurt him, honest." Sadoy looked at the farmer, then at Caesar, and realized that the circle was complete. The betrayal that had started it all had to end with redemption. "His name is Caesar," he said, "and he will choose his own master." He walked over to the enclosure, opened the door, and took a step back. Caesar slowly got up, walked out of the enclosure, and stopped. He looked at the gray-haired man, then at the sullen man who had approached them. Then he slowly, hesitantly, walked up to Ivan Petrovich and nudged his calloused hand with his nose. The farmer shuddered. Then cautiously, as if afraid of scaring away a miracle, placed his hand on the dog's head. Caesar did not pull away. He just stood there, a slight tremor running through his body. At that moment, the first bursts of festive fireworks thundered behind the stage. The sky above Upper Yar blossomed with dozens of colorful lights. The town celebrated its small victory. A victory of kindness over indifference, compassion over cruelty. And at the center of this celebration stood 4 bikers, a farmer who had repented of his actions, and 2 dogs who had changed their lives forever. A column of motorcycles rode through the night city. In front, in a specially equipped sidecar on Tanya's motorcycle, sat Rocky. He was wearing tiny, custom-made motorcycle goggles. The wind ruffled his ears. He had become the mascot of the Steele brothers and a symbol of the new life that had begun for all of them on that hot July day. on the dusty side of the road. They didn't know yet that rebuilding the shelter would become their life's work. But for now, they were just riding home, feeling completely happy. If you had to choose which act in this story was the most important, the bikers saving the puppy or the farmer's lie at the police station,